It seems each person has a certain John Hughes film they gravitate towards. Some have a preference for The Breakfast Club, while others like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles the most. For me, my personal favorite John Hughes movie is Ferris Bueller's Day Off. This is, I think, an example of a perfect film. The screenplay is perfect, the editing is perfect, the performances are perfect, the comedic timing is perfect, and the soundtrack is perfect. There's not a single misstep in this entire film. For years, Matthew Broderick and John Hughes talked about a potential sequel, possibly one where Ferris decides to skip work for the day and get into new shenanigans. However, in the end, it never came to fruition, which I think we're all okay with. Ferris Bueller's Day Off works just fine as a standalone film at about a certain period in Ferris's life. However, it may surprise you to learn that NBC broadcast a television series based on the film in 1990. A short-lived television series, which some consider one of the worst shows based on a movie ever made. But is it really as bad as its reputation suggests? Let's take a look. Now, I wouldn't blame anyone for bailing after the first episode, as the Ferris Bueller television series does not exactly start off with the right initial impression, as it makes the baffling decision to have the television Ferris insult the movie Ferris. The people most likely to tune into a Ferris Bueller TV series are fans of the movie, so it's probably not the best idea to start it off by slamming the film. The timeline is also really confusing. Ferris states the movie was based on his life, but he meets Sloane in the pilot and he's clearly younger than his film counterpart. So is the movie based on events in the future? You're just opening up a whole can of worms by acknowledging the existence of the movie within the universe of the show. There's also the odd decision to shift the setting from Chicago, which the film was meant as a love letter towards, to California. Why? I have no idea. They honestly could have set this anywhere. The only reason is so they can have episodes where Ferris goes to the beach. Then there's the theme song, which I guess is trying to replicate the Oh Yeah song from the film, but is utterly forgettable and generic. I'm sure plenty of people were humming that theme on the way to work or school. What might throw a lot of people off guard is how the show depicts Ferris Bueller going to school, but I'm not sure you could have a weekly television series of him skipping school every day. Even in the film, he only took a day off 9 times. A lot of the episodes usually revolved around Ferris concocting some scheme while trying to avoid the grasp of Principal Edward Rooney. It's a fairly standard sitcom formula, but I have to admit the show did get some decent laughs now and again, and the writers did think of some clever ideas. As Ferris, Charlie Schlatter starts off a little rough as we try to get used to somebody other than Matthew Broderick in the role, but he eventually becomes a charming lead and made the part his own. He has his occasional flaws and mistakes that gives him a certain dimension. It's not always a quick, easy out for him in every situation. Of course, this is Ferris, so he has to maneuver out of a predicament somehow, but the writers flesh him out as the show progresses. Jennifer Aniston does a solid job at portraying Jeannie, showing her frequent contempt for Ferris and everyone around her. She's able to get some funny, sarcastic quips, and even a simple eye roll can produce a laugh.
Instead of catching real criminals, the idiot cops towed my car.
They towed my mother's car, too.
I'm crying on the inside. Open up, Bozo!
Unless that dog's name is Bozo, you're out of luck.
Oh, this is the worst night of my entire life. Don't touch me!
Sloane Peterson is portrayed as a loving girlfriend most of the time, but there are episodes where Ferris has to try to win over her affections. Unlike her movie counterpart, though, she's not as willing to participate in Ferris's schemes. Schlatter and Amy Dolenz do have some great chemistry, which makes their relationship one to root for. Cameron is probably the biggest departure from the film version, as while he is a little nervous at times, he does not come close to the neurotic Cameron as played by Alan Ruck. He doesn't put up much of a fight when Ferris concocts an idea, and he's mostly saddled with the generic best friend role. The best and funniest character in the entire series is Principal Rooney. Richard really plays him with such relish, and it's funny seeing his constant determination to bust Ferris and catch him red-handed.
Gotcha. That's it. Race, call Ezra at the pound. Come out here, you miserable bitch!
Each episode seemed to utilize a certain narrative device and use that as a jumping-off point for funny situations. We get the classic trapped in a small space plotline in one episode, and there is humor gained out of Ferris and Rooney stuck in his office and Ferris not having a trick up his sleeve. There's the literally titled A Night in the Life, where Ferris, Cameron, and Jeannie try to survive downtown as every possible thing goes wrong. Cloris Leachman guest starred in an episode as Ferris's bossy grandmother who just happens to get a job at his school and he has to put up with her embarrassing actions. There were fairly typical sitcom plot lines, and yet the directors and writers involved in the show managed to keep the pacing tight and the jokes coming. I feel if the show had been allowed to go longer than 13 episodes, the creative team might have been allowed to experiment more. After all, even MASH started its run with obvious sitcom storylines before eventually moving out of the Robert Altman film's shadow and finding its own identity. And I think that's what would have happened with Ferris Bueller had NBC not prematurely cancelled it. I think if it was not named Ferris Bueller, it would have been better received. After the pilot, the series really does improve. It doesn't become a classic and doesn't stray that far from typical high school sitcoms of the day, but it's astounding that a perfectly harmless series like this one only produced half a season, while NBC let Saved by the Bell go on for 5 seasons. Even as a Ferris Bueller's Day Off fan, I can separate this enough from the movie to see it as its own thing, and I found it entertaining. It just had the unfortunate predicament of both it and Charlie Schlatter's performance being constantly compared to a classic comedy. But if you give it a watch, maybe starting with episode 2, you might be pleasantly surprised. See you next time.